It's time for the 20th day of Halloween, and today we're talking about those fanged fiends from literature and movies, vampires. Vampires are from European folklore, and vampirism itself works very much like a virus. You could kind of think of it presenting itself like a really supercharged anemia, in that the creature is no longer making its own red blood cells, and so it has to feed from others in order to get that which it needs as far as sustenance goes. In stories, there are actually a couple of ways that you could contract vampirism, and the method of infection is actually highly relevant to the kind of vampire that you would be. Essentially, it's a blood-borne pathogen, and it would be transmitted through saliva when you were bitten, exposed to saliva, or in the case of some stories, where the vampire had actually put their blood into a potion in an attempt to create a more perfect vampire. Because, believe it or not, there are drawbacks to being undead and immortal. If you were just exposed to the saliva, you could expect a mild version of vampirism, where you just experienced a little bit of bloodlust, but it may, in fact, be controllable. The more you're drained, however, the more liberty the virus has to spread to the remaining tissues. And then when you have that first feed, it has a lot more fuel and it really becomes strong. In those instances, you could expect an aversion to sunlight, in some stories, garlic, and an extreme bloodlust. This virus, vampirism, is known to transmit certain gifts or powers, and also has been known to unlock powers or abilities that are hidden within your human DNA. Generally speaking, the kind of powers that a vampire might possess would be perhaps telepathy, the ability to put someone under a trance, super speed, perhaps the ability to climb walls. In some stories, they can transmute themselves into bats. Super strength is also known to be a power of vampires, and in some stories it is important to note that vampires can go out in sunlight without dying. Apparently, in some stories, they also become little disco balls when they go out in the sun. It's worth noting that they don't actually become immortal. It's just that the virus slows down the decay of the existing tissue enough to where they would appear immortal. But generally speaking, after a few thousand years, they are going to pass away unless they come across some other untimely end. That untimely end has come in many ways. You could rip off their head, you could burn them. Running a stake through their heart is another popular one. The exposure to the sun can be intentional. In Anne Rice's story, there was actually a tower with no roof, and the other vampires would put criminal vampires or vampires that had broken the unspoken law in there and just let, the sun do their dirty work. Vampires are considered unholy, and traditionally, some of the few weapons that you have against them are things like hollowed ground, silver, and crosses. I mentioned in another video this month the fact that in stories you can't see a vampire's reflection in a mirror. Now, this is actually only true of older mirrors. In the olden days, mirrors were made of polished silver or silver-lined glass. More modern mirrors are actually have an aluminum back. So not going to be one of those warning indicators of a vampire, because they would in fact have a reflection there. The vampires of literature are actually not the only kind of vampire, though. There is an energy vampire. Now, these are real. Energy vampires just tend to feed off of high vibrational situations and people. They're the catfishers of the world. They're the mayfly men, the molesters. They are the people who feed off of the energy of those that they see as weaker or lesser, feeding off of them, pushing them down, lying to them, manipulating, getting that feeling or that energy from someone gives them a high that they are not capable of or comfortable with doing the work that would give them otherwise. Energy vampires tend to have a bit of an addiction that they develop from feeding off of people. So that's why you have people who are like compulsive liars. Generally speaking, they could be looked at as dark souls, but personally, I believe they just have a whole lot of shadow work that needs to be done. They're the people who are in love with the idea of being in love, but won't let those walls down long enough to actually show you who they are inside, because usually they don't like who they are inside. So they'll create a false persona, and thus you have the catfishers. They're not just the catfishers, though. These are also the narcissists and the other people who really get off on keeping people under their thumb. I thought I would just add that note about the energy vampires because some monsters are real. And think about that next time you're reading your Twilight and Anne Rice, or something like Bram Stoker. Brightest blessings, y'all.